There isn't much to my story. I can essentially boil it down to a single sentence. I was left home alone for a week. I left a door unlocked, and either something came in, or I'm driving myself insane. I should definitely preface this with the disclaimer. I'm a rather nervous and paranoid person by nature, traits I inherited from my mother that have only been emphasized by a love of all things horror. I've also hallucinated in the past, although it has previously been confined to right before I fall asleep or if I'm extremely sick, typically in the middle of a heat stroke. My parents recently drove out to Illinois with my brother to pick him up from camp. My mother worried about me being all alone for the 5 days the trip would take, often asking me if I was sure I'd be okay, or if she should find someone for me to stay with during the interim. She even offered to kennel our 2 dogs because she knows they can be a handful, especially when we stay at our summer home in Vermont. I'm in college and haven't ever really lived on my own before, but I, like a total idiot, convinced myself that I'd be okay for the 5 days. I had been debating living in an apartment on my own senior year, and viewed this as sort of a test run. If I didn't lose my sanity over the 5 days, moving out of the dorms on my own was a possibility. The only thing was the basement. Our house in Vermont is relatively new, only 10 years old, and never inhabited by anyone other than us. Yet, something about it always made the hairs on my neck stand on end. I'm not going to claim clairvoyance or the ability to speak to the dead or other such BS. But after my first night in the house, I forced my parents to let me switch from my room to the much smaller guest room in the back of the house, and I would flat out refuse to head down into the basement without at least one of my parents. This was when I was 12, long before I started watching horror movies or reading ghost stories. Something about those parts of the house just made every survival instinct in my body stand up and pay attention. The basement especially freaked me out, as it had a small crawl space in one of the walls that opened up to a space that ran parallel to the room. The worst part? It's full of wood from the house's construction, and we can't even see how far it goes or what's in there. The day my family left, I forced my dad to switch out the regular doorknob on the basement door with one that locked. He laughed as he did it, and laughed even harder when I made him go into the basement and try to break down the door. After all, I was just his paranoid daughter, but I was still reassured as my mother told me. Remember, the doors are all locked if the bar is horizontal. I love you. Be safe. Call me when you take the dogs out at night. I went about my day, content in the knowledge that whatever horrors my mind imagined lived in that basement, it couldn't get to the rest of the house. I called my mom at 10, took the dogs out, and went back to watching TV as I slowly worked my way through Game of Thrones. That night, everything was fine. I slept in my mother's bedroom, as my bedroom door never latched properly, and I wanted the dogs to stay with me instead of wandering the house at night. I woke up every time one of them shifted, and woke up for good around 6 a.m. Not that unusual for me. I didn't have work that day. One of the benefits of being head lifeguard is fixed hours and guaranteed free weekends, and so I continued my TV binge. I decided later on to make pizza from scratch, one of the few dishes I can competently make. I had just taken the pizza stone out of the oven and placed the flattened pizza dough down when I heard a thump from the basement. Distracted, I put my hand down only to suddenly pull it back as it contacted the heat metal handles of the stone. Completely forgetting the sound, I ran my finger underwater, fully aware that I had probably just given myself a second-degree burn. And aside from the throbbing in my hand, nothing else interesting happened until later that night. Lying in bed, a cooler full of ice packs next to me in case I couldn't sleep due to my hand, I heard a creaking from downstairs. Annie, the larger of my two dogs, and normally a total scaredy cat, jumped off the bed and stood in front of the door growling in a way I have only heard once before, when a large man came to the door at midnight and I was the last one awake. I didn't have any sort of weapon, so I grabbed the toilet cleaner from my mom's bathroom, hoping that if someone were there, I could at least spray that in their face to distract them as I ran away. When I opened the doorway, nothing was there. I wanted to laugh it off, but Annie continued growling even as she slowly walked the length of the hallway. I eventually called her back to me, closing the door behind us and wondering why the fuck I hadn't asked my dad to also switch out the bedroom doorknob with something that locked. I fell asleep 3 hours later, still listening to the occasional creaking from downstairs, waking up multiple times throughout the night as one of the dogs would whine or move about the room. This pattern continued for the next 3 days. Something would creak or groan from downstairs for a while. One of the dogs would growl or bark at it, and I would fall asleep after spending a few hours straining to hear any additional noise. During this time, sometimes I'd come back from walking the dogs or from work and find that things had been moved. I would move things on the mantle just to come back and find them rearranged again. I would leave lights turned on and then find them off when I got home. My closet door opened mysteriously, even though I always kept it closed. Blinds opened and dishes were moved from their normal places. Somehow one of my dogs even got my set of retainers, even though I normally kept them in a cabinet behind glass during the day. I was able to write off all these things as me just being forgetful or losing time. Both had happened often in the past, especially when I was stressed or not sleeping well. It made sense. I was stressing myself out over nothing and wasn't paying attention to what I was doing. It was fine until my parents got back at least. They got in late at night, and the next morning my mom's making breakfast. Later, eating the hash browns she had made, I noticed the bar on the basement door was vertical instead of horizontal. When I asked her why she had unlocked it, she just looked at me like I was crazy before saying that she has locked it that morning. And just like that, my blood went cold as every strange occurrence from the past 5 days flew through my mind. But just like during those 5 days, I shook it off and attributed it to my lack of sleep, paranoia, and occasional hallucinations. Hallucinations that had been growing more and more frequent as figures in black lurked in my peripheral or dashed across the room in the corner of my eye. But now I'm not so sure. This morning my brother headed to a swim meet, which started at 8 and was about a half an hour away. My mom stuck her head in my room around 7 to let me know they were leaving and that I should get some more sleep. She closed the door behind her, and I listened as she walked downstairs and the car pulled out of the driveway. At 8:13, my door was pushed open yet again. Still sleepy, I watched with mostly closed eyes as a tall figure looked in on me as I slept. My parents did this sometimes, checking in to make sure I was still breathing as they went about their morning routines. It wasn't until I got downstairs and realized neither of my parents were at home and only one car was missing that something wasn't right. I'm not sure if what I saw was real or just evidence that I'm losing my mind. It could be nothing. But when I look out at the woods surrounding my house, I'm filled with a deep sense of dread. Whatever this thing is, real or a figment of my imagination, it's getting bolder, and I'm scared of what happens when it decides to take things to the next level.